So we've prepared our data, we've processed our results, now we're up to presenting those results. Now, one of the best ways to present your results is using pivot tables and pivot charts. Let me take you back to the data sheet, for example. If I'm sitting in this data and I go to Insert in the ribbon, to the hard left is Pivot Table, so I'm going to click that. It immediately picks up the table or the range I'm sitting in, so I'm just going to click OK. Now what we have here on the right hand side is what we call a field list. Yours might look different to mine. This little cog or flower, I like to think it is called Tools. And if you click it and I go for the first option, yours probably looks like this. I actually find this is not a very easy to work with layout. So I'm going back to Tools and I'm choosing the second option, and that's how I like to have my field list laid out, because I can see more fields in this area here. I also like my fields to be alphabetically listed because usually there's a lot of them. So I'm going to hit this drop down here and I'm going to ask it to sort them from A to Z. And so I now have an alphabetical listing of all the column headings that were in the table called data. Now what I do is simply drag these fields into these buckets here. So I might decide that I'm going to have location as a column. So I drag location into columns. And there you see all the locations listed as columns. But then I might change my mind and think, actually no, location would be better as a row. So I drag it into the rows bucket. So now my locations appear as rows. I might then decide that I'll have status as a column. So when I go for status, I can see employed, retired, or unemployed. And then I might think, actually, no, I don't want status. So to get rid of it, I'll just drag it out here until I get across and drop it. Of course, there's many ways to manage this. This is just the easiest way I find to drag things back and forth. If I want life members, I'll drag that into my column, and now I'm seeing life member or members, and then I'm seeing my regions. Now, what if I want to count the number of life members and members by region? Then drag the member ID and drop it into the values. And straight away, we've got a sum of the member IDs. Now, I don't want to sum the member IDs. Maybe I want to count them. So I'm going to hit this drop down here, and I'm going to change the value field settings. And I'm going to change it from sum to count. When I go OK, it will count the number of life members and members by region, giving me a total by region and also giving me a total by the different types of members. That's a pivot table. So a pivot table summarizes what's going on in your data. If you have a huge amount of data like this, it really tells you nothing. But you can summarize it in a separate sheet called a pivot table. I could take out column labels and just put types. I could change row labels to say region. And I could say up here, number of members. And I've simply created a pivot table. Now what happens is as the data changes, you'll want to refresh the pivot table. When you click on the pivot table, not only do you see the field list, but up here in the ribbon, you see two tabs, one called Pivot Table Analyze and one called Design. If you choose Pivot Table Analyze, you can actually ask it to refresh the pivot table and get the latest data because the source data that it's connected to has updated or changed. So we just refresh it. And so there's an up-to-date list, total of 200 members, 170 members, 30 of them lifetime members, and majority of lifetime members are based in Te Puke. Right, so that's one pivot table. Let's name the shape Pivot 1. Typically, you have multiple pivot tables coming off one list of data. So let's make another pivot table. Let's go to Data. Let's sit in the list somewhere. Let's go Insert. Let's go Pivot Table. Let's go OK. And here we are again in a new sheet, ready to design a pivot table. I'm going to sort my fields from A to Z, and then I'm going to arrange them into rows, columns, values, and even filters. Okay, so in this pivot table, I'd like to see location as a row. I'd like to see age bands as a column. I'd like to see member ID as a value. I'll change the value field settings to count in terms of a function and no full stop in terms of a heading. So it's going to count the number of member IDs. So in Mount Maunganui, we've got 15 members between the ages of 25 and 50, 4 members between the ages of 50 and 75, and 19 members in total in Mount Maunganui. I also want to see member ID added again to the values a second time. Go into its value field settings, show the values as a percentage of the column total, and give it the name percent. So then what I'm saying is the percentage of members who are between the ages of 25 and 50 and based in Mount Maunganui, 14%. And in fact, 10.44% of members are based in Mount Maunganui, and 2.12% of members are based in Aotearoa. I might change this to regions and change this to ages. And there is my second pivot table, pivot 2. So a pivot table really is a matter of adding fields from your list to the columns, rows, or values bucket. When you add it to the values bucket, you can get into the value field settings and you can change the function, the name, and even show the values as various options in here. Extremely powerful. I've made this pivot table and I'm happy with it based on region, but let's say I want to make a duplicate of this. So I'm going to control drag pivot 2 to make a duplicate. I'm going to remove location as a row, and I want the same information presented but by ethnicity. And so now I can see that 12.98% of my membership is Asian, 36.64% is New Zealander. You can even click on one of these, right click and say sort largest to smallest. So I can see my largest ethnicity group, and if I go back to pivot 2, I could right click one of these total percentages, sort largest to smallest. So my largest region is Tauranga and my largest ethnic group is New Zealander. I might control drag to make a duplicate of that pivot table sheet, and I might remove ethnicity, and what I want to see now is life members as a row. So I can now, if I right click this and sort it from largest to smallest, I'm now seeing my largest percentage, 90.79%, are members, 9.21% are life members. So you can actually create a pivot table and then duplicate the sheet so that you're not recreating the wheel and just make some moderate changes. Now what I'd like to do is present this information on a dashboard. I don't want one pivot table in this sheet and one pivot table here and one over here. So let's create a new sheet and let's name it dashboard. I am then going to call it my membership dashboard in A1. I'll make this larger, say 22. It's not very dashboard-esque with these grid lines, so I'll go to View and remove the grid lines. In fact, I'll remove the headings, which takes away the column headings and the row numbers just for that sheet. Now I'll go to Pivot 2, and I'm going to move this pivot table and put it on my dashboard. So you click somewhere in the pivot table, you go to Pivot Table Analyze, you simply move the pivot table, and it says where's the location. So I'm going to then choose my dashboard and I'll just click here, and that's where I want to move it to. So I'll go OK. And so it's moved that pivot table onto my dashboard. So now this is an empty sheet which I can right click and delete. Now I'm going to grab my next pivot table, this one here, which is by ethnicity. I'll click somewhere on the pivot table Analyze, I'll move the pivot table, put it on the dashboard, and put it just to the right over here and OK. And so I've moved the other pivot table onto here. This is not by region, it's by ethnicity, so I'm just going to change that and clarify that. And of course you can adjust your column headings. Might be better just to go to view and turn the grid lines on for a moment and the headings for a moment just while I tidy it up, and then I'll get rid of them later. Reduce that column and just get it sitting nicely. Now I might also, let me just tidy up these columns, double click, these columns, double click. I'll go and grab the third pivot table, that was this one here. I'll change this to type because it was the type of membership. I'll go to my pivot table analyze tab and I'll move this pivot table, put it on the dashboard and put it just out to the right here and OK. And then I can reduce the width of this. I can select these columns, double click. And so there are, and even just take the zoom down a fraction, there are my 3 pivot tables sitting on my dashboard. This no longer has anything in it, so I can delete it. This has nothing in it, so I can delete it. And I've got my dashboard. This pivot table, I've decided I actually don't need it because it's encapsulated in the other pivot table, so I'm just going to delete this as well. So my data, let me drag that to the right. My data is sitting in this sheet, my calculations are in this sheet, and my dashboard is in this sheet. Okay, now let's say we want to go to view and take the grid lines back off. We need to be able to slice and dice this information. We also need to be able to chart this information. Let's do that first. I'm going to click on this pivot table, and if I go to pivot table analyze, there's a pivot chart option. So I'll click that. I might go for a pie chart, and a 3D pie chart, and I'll go OK. And so there is a pivot chart to go with my pivot table. Let me close the field list, which is basically just showing me the proportion of life members to members. I can also go to pivot chart analyze and remove the field button so that they don't show on the chart, giving the chart more room to breathe. And here I can put percentage of life members. So I've just clicked on the chart title, started typing, and there's my chart. Now, I want to add the ability to filter my pivot table and pivot chart. So I click on a pivot table and I go to pivot table analyze and I want to insert a slicer. And I want to be able to slice this information by region. So let me find that in this list, or location. Also by ethnicity. So let me just choose that as well. And also by life members. And OK that. So I've created 3 slices. Let me just move this one here. This one can go over here. Actually, this one can go here. So you just drag them, resize them until you're happy with their location, etc. You can also choose colours. This one I might choose an aqua. This one I might choose a blue, more blue. And this one I might go for a purple. And again, I might move that one over here. But the whole idea of the slicer is if I just want to focus on Mount Maunganui, I can click it. And I'm just seeing Mount Maunganui. If I hold the Control key, I can choose Mount Maunganui and Tauranga. And now I've got 2. If I clear with this button, I go back to seeing all locations. And if I want to see a Mokoroa and Papamoa, I can drag and just see those 2. But notice this slicer is only affecting this pivot table. Let me clear this. When I click on this slicer and I go to slicer up here, there is a report connections button. If I choose report connections, it tells me that that particular slicer is only affecting pivot table 2, not 3 or 4. I want it to affect 3 and I want it to affect 4, so I'll go OK. So now when I choose, say, Tipuki, that is the number of members and life members in Tipuki by ethnicity and by total. When I choose Tauranga, notice all 3 change. Papamoa, Paispa. If I choose 1, 2, 3, then I'm focusing on those three. And these figures all represent, and the chart represent this particular slicer. Let's do it to this slicer. I'm going to click this slicer, go to slicer, report connections, tell it to affect pivot tables 3 and 4, and OK. Go to this slicer, report connections, tell it to affect pivot table 3 and 4, and OK. So if I choose life members, there are the life members in the region by ethnicity and by ages. If I choose members, then that's the information regarding members and the chart effects as well, and life members as well. And then clear it. I could ask for life members in Tauranga, and there is a double slice and Māori. So that's my life members in Tauranga that are Māori. So there's two that are Māori in Tauranga, and then clear and clear and clear. So we've created a dashboard with slices and a chart. Now what if I want to see a timeline? I'm going to click on a pivot table. I'm going to go to Pivot Table Analyze and insert a timeline. I'm going to do it by join date, the date they joined our club, and OK. And here's my timeline. I'll move it, resize it. When it comes to the timeline, I can focus in on just November, just October, or August, September, October, November, December. Focus in on those 5 months. Or maybe I want to switch to years and just focus on 2017, 2018, 2016, the years that they joined. So a timeline is very time orientated and allows you to filter your pivot tables and your pivot charts by time. So slices and timelines are very, very useful when it comes to creating a pivot table dashboard. Very powerful. These pivot tables are what we call standard pivot tables. They are built off a single list of information, data. You can create pivot tables that are based on a data model. And a data model means that you employ Power Pivot and or Power Query to create a data model. And a data model gets information from a variety of sources, and your pivot table is not based on a single list, it's based on a number of data sources. So maybe that's another session. I do hope you've enjoyed this collection of videos, and I do hope I see you again. Please like or subscribe and let me know that the content I'm creating resonates for you. Please feel free to leave any comments. My name is Kathy Barker from Software Solutions. Ka kite.